Here's a bit of background. I lived my whole life in Southeast Michigan. I was born in the late 80s and came of age in the time of Hocus Pocus, Casper, Now and Then, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and The Craft. The time of girl power, and girls with powers, am I right? In the early to mid-90s, us kids without cable TV were limited to primetime network television specials that were sometimes magic shows. I don't remember exact details, but it surely got my attention, especially the participate at home and touch your TV screen parts. I think a lot of people my age had a harmless and whimsical relationship with the occult, pre-Y2K. I went to a public school in a middle-class area, and I remember that in 2nd or 3rd grade, debunking magic was actually part of our curriculum. There was a whole chapter in our reading and writing textbook. It defined magic as clever tricks and broke down magic tricks step by step. This I do remember vividly because it was so bizarre. Needless to say, it introduced my class to Harry Houdini. I was either in my last year of elementary or my first year of middle school, so my ghost story takes place Halloween night, 1997 or 1998. My BFF had an early November birthday and talked her mum into celebrating with a trick-or-treating and then sleepover birthday party. There were probably around 10 to 15 girls, including me. After returning from trick-or-treating, we ran downstairs to their finished basement and dumped all of our candy and started doing preteen girl things. I'm sure there was truth or dare and cootie catchers and nail polish. She had one of those little TVs with a VCR built in, and I'm sure there was a movie on that no one was watching. At some point, probably around 8 or 9 p.m, a girl suggested contacting spirits, and nobody objected. My BFF went into the laundry room and started digging through holiday decorations, looking for candles, and came back with her arms full of random candlesticks, tea lights, 3 wick candles, and a lighter. All the candles were lit and pushed close together. We turned off all the lights and TV and sat in a circle. Someone suggested that we contact Harry Houdini since he died in Detroit on Halloween, and we were in proximity to Detroit. Kid logic. Our seance was a joke. It was just 10 plus girls talking over each other, applying our bumbling pop culture knowledge. Most of the girls got bored, turned some lights on, and started playing Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board on the other side of the basement to keep the spooky vibe alive. Me and another girl, who I don't remember, stayed with the candles. We sat next to each other, and I did all the talking. I basically told Mr. Houdini that I knew he was here with us, and to prove it. All the candles were still lit, with their flames pointing straight up. In school, around this time, we started learning about geometry, circles, protractors, degrees. At some point, I asked Houdini to, quote, make a candle do a 360. Remember that all the candles were pushed together. It started to get cold. It wasn't like the feeling of your blood running cold when you're scared. It felt like standing outside in the cold on a windless day. We could see our breath, and the cold made us focus on the candles. One, just one of the candle's flames, not the wick, slowly moved down the wick and was burning perpendicular, like the flame was sideways, like the pointy top of the flame was pointing to the left like an arrow. The sideways flame then started moving slowly around the wick, like a ticking clock hand. When the flame made it all the way around the candle, it extinguished itself, not disturbing any of the other lit candles. I remember me and the other girl looking at each other. I was horrified, and she was calm. She shook her head and put her finger to her mouth, like, shh, and she blew out the rest of the candles. We stood up and joined the rest of the party and never talked about it again. This experience creeped me out so much that I didn't even talk about it until my late 20s. I do not believe we contacted Harry Houdini. Probably some friendly Halloween-loving spirit that felt generous enough to grace the two of us with a genuine paranormal experience. When I was 14 years old, I went to a church gathering on Halloween night that was called Hallelujah Night, a Christian alternative to Halloween. My family and I would get there in the afternoon since we'd volunteer to help set up the booths, cakewalk, candy barrels, etc. But I was mostly there to get first dibs on all of the candy. After I finished helping with the usual booth I helped set up, I took a seat on the bench near the main sanctuary. It was my favorite place to sit at, since I could see the entire lot, and most of all, the beautiful sunset. I pulled out my PSP and was scrolling through some music I had on it when some guy approached me and started a conversation. I've never been a people person, so usually when things like this happen, I keep the conversation short. However, this guy had a weird type of warmth to him, as if he was a friend of mine. As the conversation carried on, I started to ask him if he was new because I hadn't seen him before. He told me that he had been going to this church for years, but left after an incident happened. When I asked him about the incident, he paused, looked at me, and said, "There are some things that people pick up on that they know are not normal. Also, that you should never get curious about things that you know you should leave alone." I had a sort of confused look on my face, since I didn't know what he meant at the time. The guy noticed it and said that I would understand once I get older. I looked down at the PSP that I had in my hand still, and looked back up, and the guy was gone. I looked around and couldn't find him anywhere in the lot, except for a few people still prepping for Hallelujah Night. It didn't make any sense. Fast forward to a few months later, I was sitting in the main sanctuary before leaving to do my usual volunteer work on the upper floor of the main sanctuary. The upper floor was a daycare area for kids, so at the end of service, volunteers would escort the children downstairs, and I would go into each room, shutting off the lights and making sure no children were still up there. I'll never forget getting up to leave to do my usual duties when the pastor started talking about an upcoming funeral. I looked at the big screens on each side of the main sanctuary, and the face of the man I was talking to during Hallelujah Night was there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The funeral was not to be held at that church. They just put it up on the screens to let the congregation know where it would take place. He didn't look different at all, literally the same in the picture they showed. To this day, it still seems unreal. I was beyond shook as I made my way out to the main sanctuary and to the flights of big stairs as I went to the upper floor. Once I made it to the upper floor, another volunteer had confirmed that all the children were escorted downstairs. She noticed that I looked sort of pale from seeing what I saw in the main sanctuary and asked if I was okay. I told her it was nothing and proceeded to cut off all the lights on the upper floor as she left downstairs. The upper floor was like a giant hallway with doors on each side, and a door at the end of the hallway with a giant window in it. When I came to the last room at the end of the hall, I would always leave the blinds on that big window open, since the light always illuminated the dark hallway and made me feel less scared. But as I left the room, I remember feeling panicked. It started freezing, and I felt like if I left that room, something was waiting for me in the darkened rooms that was going to jump out and attack me. As I'm trying to muster up the courage to just run for it, I see a small head of a child peek out a couple of doors down. It stayed there for a few seconds and then put its head back in the room. I immediately called out to the child, but no answer. The fear I had a minute ago was gone as I left the last room to go through the illuminated hallway. I made it to the other room in a matter of seconds, turning on the lights and searching the entire room for the child I saw, but no one was there. I started getting spooked again as I shut off the lights in that room. Then, one of the most terrifying things I had ever seen and experienced happened. As I was leaving the room, I looked back at the last room's window, which illuminated the hallway, and out of nowhere, a massive black mass moved in front of the window, almost covering the light completely. It was darker than black, and its outline as it covered the light seemed to be moving. It was enough to scare me to run for my life. I ran the rest of the hallway and down the stairs. I stopped by one of the ushers who told me not to run, but when I told him what I saw, he looked at me as if I was crazy. Once church was over, I told my parents what happened on the ride home, and they ended up not believing me since they're skeptics. I've been so scared that I haven't been to any churches since then. That spirit clearly gave me a warning about the place, in my opinion. I wanted to investigate everything associated with it, but I feel that he gave me that warning for a reason. What would have happened if I'd uncovered something that I shouldn't? What if that man uncovered something he shouldn't have and died because of it? I have a strong feeling that church knows what's happening there. Demons don't just make their homes in churches, especially if the people of the church are faith-abiding Christians. But I know what I saw that day, and it's something that still scares me to this very day. I first learned about ghosts when I was in second grade. My friend told me, and to be honest, not having ever seen a ghost, I just brushed it off and told my friend that I didn't believe in ghosts. My friend responded by jokingly saying, "You shouldn't have said that. Now they're going to haunt you." I chuckled a little bit, but my friend seemed serious. But still, they said it in such a sarcastic way. Later on that night, I was very scared and thought something was going to happen. But alas, nothing happened. So I realized there was nothing to worry about and ghosts aren't real. But then, something happened that to this day, I can't explain. About almost a year since I learned about ghosts, I had my first possible encounter. So it was at night time, and I was getting ready to go to bed. But first I had to brush my teeth. My mum was in the bathroom helping my little brother brush his teeth. Anyway, as I made my way up the stairs, I then made a U-turn. Basically, when you reach the top of the stairs, you can walk straight into my room or make a U-turn and go down the hall. On the right side of the hall is the bathroom, and at the end is my parents' room. As I made the U-turn, I could see my dad lying in bed, along with our 2 dogs lying in the room as well. But then, I heard a noise that made me run for it. It sounded like someone was chasing me. I can vividly remember that I could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer. Whoever, or whatever it was coming from my room. I bolted for the bathroom door and opened it and fell onto the bathroom floor. Before I say anything, my mum said something like, "What's wrong with you tonight? You've been up here making noise for the past 5 minutes." This was a while ago, so I don't remember exactly, but it was words to that effect. I then asked, "What noise?" And she responded with something like, "You've been in your room messing with something, then you ran through the halls for a bit, and went back to your room." I immediately say that I didn't. and get my dad up from his sleep so he can check the house because I came to the conclusion that someone had broken in. We found nothing. No evidence someone broke in. Also, I didn't tell them someone broke in. All I said was, I think someone is in the house. Now, if it was a thief, then they clearly have some skill, because nothing was out of place and nothing was stolen. Fast forward about 6 some years from this. I was just starting 9th grade and homeschool simultaneously. About a good couple of months into homeschool, and I'm home alone. So I go upstairs to use the bathroom. Then, as I'm about to come down the stairs, I hear voices. It sounded like 2 adult men speaking to each other in another language. I decided just to walk down the steps and see who it is. Yeah, that was extremely stupid, and I'm so lucky it wasn't really robbers. Somehow the radio turned on, and it didn't even sound like music. Now, it was a Bluetooth radio, so maybe someone outside connected their phone to it. Still, it was creepy nonetheless. About 2 weeks later, it turns on again, and no audio or anything is playing. Now, the radio is always plugged in, but I thought you had to manually turn it on, but I guess not. Now for the actual, well, possible ghost encounters on Halloween night. Yeah, it was Halloween night. This was the first Halloween I stayed home. Anyway, my mum and little brother and dad are all home. Now, this picture of my mum and dad was hanging on the wall. It's been there for years. We never took it off the wall or anything. I see my dog staring at it with a growl look on his face. The next thing you know, the picture goes flying forward off the wall. My German Shepherd ran away scared. My mum and dad rejected my ghost idea, even though the thing went forward by a good amount instead of just falling straight down. Everything could have a non-paranormal explanation, but the picture one is definitely intriguing. About a year later after the picture incident at Halloween, something happened that tops all other potential encounters that makes me want to rethink about not believing in ghosts. It was early morning, and I was the only one downstairs. I don't know exactly what I saw, but the best way I can explain it is a possible apparition. The thing was white, I guess a little pale, but I saw it in the corner of my eye, so I turned towards it, and it walked behind a doorway to the kitchen. I got up and went in there. Again, it's stupid of me since it could have been an intruder. I ran into the kitchen, and once again, I found nothing. At the end of 2020, around November, beginning of December, only me and my little brother are at home. That's when I hear what vividly sounded like several footsteps coming out of my parents' room and stopping in the hallway by the bathroom. My German Shepherd heard them and started to go up the steps, and I followed him. I searched all of the upstairs and found nothing. The next day, I heard more footsteps, except when they reached the bathroom, they stopped, and moments later, returned to my parents' room. This time, only I was in the house. I ran up the stairs to see what or who it was, and found nothing. A few days later, my dad heard what he said sounded like someone walking in the attic. He went up there, and I followed behind because I was curious. We found nothing. My dad still won't accept the paranormal explanation, and said it was probably birds or something. So what exactly is happening in my house? Well, I don't know. The only thing I do know is that the paranormal activity is increasing gradually over time. Hopefully it slowly goes away, but I don't think it will. When I was a kid, I lived in Wisconsin from around a few months old to around 9 years. Even though I was young, This was one of the only things I distinctly remember from my time living there. My family moved around a couple of times within that period, but near the end of us living there, we built our own house on top of a large hill that was owned by my grandparents. The house was beautiful, and my parents put so much money and hard work into it. Now, I've always been scared of the paranormal, and I definitely believed in it. Nothing strange was noticed initially, but on Halloween, cliché I know, but it's true, my sister had a sleepover with her friends and decided to use a Ouija board. Those things are creepy, and I never touch one anymore. I don't know if they got anything, but after that, we started to notice little things happening. There was a small patch of woods on the edge of the property, but still not far from the house. My dog would never go near those woods, even if my siblings and I would go play in there. And I mean never, not even during the day. Every night when we would let him out for the night, he would run out the door and immediately bark at the woods, like a back off kind of bark. Any dog owners would know what I mean. He would go do his business quickly and run back to the house. He never liked to leave the lit area on the patio for longer than necessary, and he wouldn't go in the direction of the woods, ever. We didn't really think anything of it, mostly thought that there was an animal he saw or something. But that wasn't it. My sister's room in the house was in the corner closest to the woods. She used to sleepwalk, which I heard some people say that sleepwalking is related to the influence of paranormal activity. I don't know if it's true, but I kinda believe it. She would also have a recurring dream every night. In the dream, her field of vision was low, like she was on the floor, and it was checkered tile on the floor. There were two people, indistinct like silhouettes, talking with their backs to her in the distance. Every night, she would get slightly closer to the people talking. She thought it was strange, but other than that, she assumed it was nothing. I thought it was creepy as hell. As a kid, I also experienced terrible ear infections, to the point where I would be awake for hours, crying like crazy. The big thing to note was when we were moving out, my dad was alone in the house, taking down our lights in our rooms. He said he heard laughing from downstairs, which sounded like kids. He was home alone, so he thought that some neighbor kid had come, so he yelled, "Hello?" After he said that, the laughing went quiet, until he heard it again when on the phone to my aunt. She also says that while he was talking to her, he asked, "Hello?" again, and told her that he heard the laughing again. Nothing especially dangerous happened, but it was scary for me, and I never forgot it, and I never will. Even now, the people that have moved in after us have reported that baby toys and dog toys have gone missing. My dad, who is kind of sensitive to the paranormal, says that he had a dream once of a shadowy figure leaning over the new owner's baby crib while the baby was sleeping. The baby's nursery is the same room that was my sister's, closest to the woods. We only ever thought about this stuff after moving out, and since then, I haven't gotten another ear infection, and my sister has never sleepwalked or had that recurring dream again. Today, when we think about it, we have a theory that the hill was some sort of Native American burial ground, because Wisconsin has many of those, but we don't know for sure. A few years back, a few friends and I decided to go up to a hiking trail to drink and have a laugh during Halloween. This was around 2015, and the place we went to was Murphy Ranch Park in Whittier, California. It's in a suburb in the foothills of the city. If anyone's familiar with the place, they'll know exactly what I mean when I explain where we were. The park is a part of Turnbull Canyon, which is the most haunted part of the city, and some say the state. If you look it up, you'll see a lot of stories about a burned down asylum and a lot of sacrifices done up there. It's eerie to say the least. At the entrance to the park is a benched and wooded area that leads to multiple hiking trails that we were sitting at, which is probably 50 to 100 feet from the mouth of the park that leads to the residential street. While sitting around, we heard an owl hooting about, but it didn't sound right to us. It almost sounded human-like. As we were talking and drinking, we started even joking about it, and it seemed to get louder and closer. After about 5 minutes, from almost nowhere, a man started walking through the park between the benches. He was around 5'10", dressed in all black with a cloak. Now, the part that was weird to us is that while he walked, there was no stride or bounce to his step. His shoulders and body almost seemed stationary, and as if he was a few inches off the ground. His feet did not strike the dirt at all from what I saw. His pace wasn't slow enough for it to be more of a gentle stride. It's kind of hard to explain the way it looked in words without showing someone in person with an example of what it looked like to me. While he was walking through, the owl sounds were much louder than before, and a lot closer. It felt almost as if it was right behind us, daring us to look. When we decided to make a run for it, it seemed as if time stopped. There was no sound, no light, nothing, and the man turned to us and looked at us all, almost as if he was looking into our eyes individually, but at the same time. He was as pale as a sheet and had yellowish blue eyes that were piercing and almost glowing. As dark as it was, you could see them, but no other features besides his bald head. After what felt like forever, but was only a few seconds, he turned his head and walked, or glided rather, straight into the trails, and the owl noise was back, and it seemed as though he was following it, and within a second of walking in, he was nowhere in sight. In that exact moment, we all sprinted to our cars and took off immediately. None of us have been back since. Knowing the history of what goes on in those hills, I really couldn't say if the person in question was even human. A friend of ours tried to talk to him to ask him what he was up to. 100% not my idea. I was scared witless. And he just ignored the call and was gone. Last Halloween, me and some friends decided we were going to go to an abandoned crematory, just as something creepy to do on such a holiday. Me and the other 2 guys decided to look around, while the 2 girls who tagged along with us decided to wait. So we started to walk towards it to figure out how we were going to get in. There was a white van next to the crematory, not too old but very beat up and rusty. As we walked past it, I clearly remember having the crap scared out of me, because I saw what I remember as being a translucent, rotting face staring back at me through the window. Soon after that, and deciding that there wasn't a good way in, we decided to leave and make our way back home. Later that night, one of my friends who was with me asked if we could do a call on Snapchat. He sounded scared out of his mind. He said he kept seeing things in his room and told me he saw something in the van window as well. He later began sobbing, and I stayed on the call with him for a while until deciding that he would be fine. The next day, he said he was fine and nothing else happened. But I will always distinctly remember what I saw in that van's window. I should preface this by saying that Halloween this year was pretty uneventful. I'm not sure if I'm happy with that or sad, but last year was very interesting, and it happened in part because I did something stupid. I'm from a Celtic family. My parents are both descended from American colonist families. My mother's family for sure being of the group that came to the Americas to carry on their Celtic traditions in peace. So I grew up being very interested in Celtic tradition and our more pagan roots, even though my parents were very devout Protestants. They allowed me the interest, mainly because they liked connecting more with their roots. So, as I'm sure many of you have read in the common Samhain articles that make their rounds every year since the internet began, there are a few games and practices that Celts participated in on Samhain every year. The whole holiday is about playing with ghosts and making contact to ask questions, always in a respectful manner. In my household and my wife's household, most commonly you would always light a fire, inside or outside depending on where you were gathered, and sometimes leave out candy or other goodies on your doorstep after trick-or-treating was over, or bury them in the planter area next to the front door. The burying, I found, is key for the distinction that you're leaving a treat for the dead. Herein lies my screw-up. It was near the end of the night, and trick-or-treating had ended a little while ago, and I realized I hadn't put anything out as we got back, and went inside like usual. So I went to the kitchen and looked for something quick to put out. I prefer grabbing apples for this task. A lot of the traditional Samhain games and customs are described as being done with an apple, bobbing for apples, the peel game, so it feels prescient to use an apple when leaving treats for the dead, as they clearly have an affinity for them. I look into the bowl that sits on the nook table and realized that I hadn't bought any new apples since I had picked them myself, and although they weren't rotten, you could see some soft spots beginning to form. I thought to myself that this shouldn't be a really big deal, as more than likely it would just be dug up by an animal later. So I grabbed the best looking one of the bunch, which I still probably wouldn't have eaten without some considerable paring. I stepped out the front door and down the stairs of my house, grabbed the gardening spade sticking out from one of my wife's planters, and scooped a quick hole out in the dirt next to the bottom stair, tossing in the apple and covering it. I don't know why I still buried the thing. I should have just left it on the stoop, but it was done, so I went back inside and promptly forgot about it. Later that night, the kids were in bed, and my wife and I were watching Trick or Treat, our all-time favorite movie to watch Halloween night. It must have been near midnight when we hear 3 knocks on our front door. Our home is not a huge house, but it is a pre-Great Depression colonial, so it retains some key features that, though 100 years old, are more upscale features on new homes today. This includes our very heavy wooden front door and brass door knocker, which is inordinately loud for what it is. It's quite easy to overdo it when you use the door knocker. You can typically hear it from upstairs, with minimal effort put in on the part of the knocker. The weird thing was that these knocks were not that. They were even and just loud enough for us to hear from our spot near the foyer on the couch. The unusual quietness of the door knocker made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. My wife and I froze and looked at each other. Her level of belief is slightly higher than mine, though not by much. But she's still usually quick to explain things away. Still, it was too uncanny. "Do you think there are still any trick-or-treaters out?" It had been a mild Halloween compared with other years, so she was wondering, as well as I, if any wayward trick-or-treaters had simply decided to try their luck on their way home. I had probably forgotten to turn off the porch light. My first thought, if I'm being honest, was older kids more interested in tricks than treats. My inclination was to ignore it. "Let's just ignore it. I'm not interested in answering that," I said. As if in an answer to my statement, 3 more knocks came from the door, a little louder this time. I got up and went to the foyer quietly, as I had a bit of the shivers now. My wife, who was also a little on edge at this point, whispered as loudly as she could behind me, "Tell me you aren't answering that door." I assured her I was just going to look as I went. It's only 10 or so feet to the foyer from where we were seated, by the fireplace and TV. I stepped into the foyer. I say foyer, but really just a small entryway with a coat closet and a door on each side, separating the front door and coat closet from the rest of the house. Useful as a kind of airlock during really hot or cold times of the year, but most of the time, the house side door just hangs open, as it was now. Right as I was crossing onto the tile that designates the area near the front door, the knock sounded again, loudly. I jumped mid-step, and then made the last 2 steps to the small eye-level window in the old door. There was no one standing there. The window doesn't offer great visibility, but with some maneuvering, it's possible to see the whole stoop in front of the door, which is what I was doing now. Nobody was there. If it was someone knocking and then running, I'd have probably caught them in the window to the left of the foyer entrance, or my wife would have seen them outside the living room window to the right, which I was asking her about quietly as I was looking. I commented when she answered no, the only way there's someone there right now is if they're pressed up against the door just under me. My wife asked quickly, "You aren't going to open it, are you?" "Absolutely not," I answered. I still had the feeling that something uncanny was going on, and living person or not, on the other side of the door, opening it was a bad idea. I went back and pressed my head into the windows on either side of the doorway protrusion on the front door of the house to see if I could see anything on the front step against the doorway. Even though I could get a pretty good angle on it, within about a foot of actually seeing straight across the front door, I still couldn't see anything. I went back to the couch, relaxing a little. My wife was very suspicious of the knocks. She seemed to be leaning towards the visitor not being of the living, and she told me as much, but we didn't have any knocks after that, and decided to call it a night after the movie ended. Fast forward a few days later, my wife had been complaining about catching the slightest hint of a dead animal smell when arriving and leaving at the house, and a couple of nights we had received phantom knocks at the door. That same light tapping on the door knocker. I had even opened the front door once, to find no one there. Then a cloud of gnats showed up. They swarmed just over the end of the flower bed, across from the door, and at the end of the path to the driveway, away from where I had buried the apple. They didn't leave the one little area of the air over the flower bed, not even after it snowed pretty heavily. I was amazed they were even still alive considering the season and temperature, opposed to what should be amenable to them around here. All of these little things were beginning to add up, and I had come to a possible conclusion before my wife. I had done a little bit of research to find out if gnats were associated as heralding a certain entity. I didn't really find anything. My wife began to get really creeped out by the knocking. It had been a couple of weeks since Halloween, and she had heard a knock on the door when I was at work. She asked me why I thought this was going on, and what I thought might stop it. I then told her I had buried the apple this year. I also told her, because it was bothering me a little now, that it was less fresh than I'd have liked. Let's say she was a little less than pleased to hear this. Her response went a little something like this. "So you offered rotten fruit to anything that happened to be passing by on Halloween night? What a stupid idea. What kind of things do you think prefer spoiled treats?" I assured her at this point that it was still a very edible apple, but this did not dissuade her from her outrage. "That doesn't matter. You probably attracted a demon." Frankly though, I thought she was probably right. But whatever it was, it hadn't been invited in, so it was just hanging out outside, reminding us it was there every few nights. I dug up what was left of the apple and got rid of it. She immediately contacted a friend of hers, a Reiki master, to cleanse the house, which she did. The most interesting thing is that almost immediately after that, the cloud of gnats just disappeared. It's how we decided we would know whether or not we were in the clear. And that was it. Never will I ever bury rotten fruit on Halloween again. I stick to leaving it out in a candy bowl overnight these days. It was Halloween 2012, and my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had the day after Halloween off, because it was considered a church holy day, so my friends were game to start the weekend early. On nights where we didn't go to parties, we usually did the same thing. We'd sit on the front steps for a couple of hours and joke around. Then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this crappy pizza place across town because the prices were so cheap. Since a few of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we weren't much in a party mood, so we did our usual. It's around 10 or 10:30 at night, and the pizza joint is closing up for the night. There were 3 of us, me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finish our food, refill our drinks, and head out. To get back to my house, we had to cross a large mall parking lot that's about 4 football fields long and 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we are not dumb, naive kids. We had all grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All 3 of us were pretty streetwise and were competent out on the streets by ourselves. But we experienced something this night that we were totally unprepared for. So we're walking through this parking lot, and it's absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight. Suddenly, we see a white tradesman's van creeping slowly behind us about 100 yards back. I know the old white van cliché, but I swear this is a real story. I point it out to my friends, and we pick up our pace. We pop the collars on our jackets and hunch out our shoulders to make us seem a bit bigger than we are. In an instant, the van speeds up and cuts off our path. Everything in the van is pitch black, so we can't see any people. That's when someone calls out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween. You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't cut you off in a parking lot unless it has bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We could run, but they're in a van. They would catch up to us easily, and we'd have to turn our backs to them. He says it again. "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I respond trying to sound tough. "Yeah, but it's over now, so we're heading home and you're on our way." "Nah, dude, Halloween ain't over. We've still got tons of candy in here." The tone suddenly shifted, and still we can't see anyone in the van. The 3 of us puff out our chests and get ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it was dragging on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by sternly saying, "Listen, I don't know what you think you're about to do, but if you don't leave, we're gonna kick your ass." Once he said that, the back door of the van swung open, and 2 very tall men stepped out. They had black suits with black leather gloves, and were well built and strong looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't a Halloween prank. At that moment, all 3 of us went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. There was no place for us to go. We had no idea how we were going to get out of this situation, and I have no idea what these guys were planning to do with 3 18-year-old men, but they seemed like they knew what they were doing, and we were all getting ready for the fight of our lives. The van stopped, and it looked like they were about to make their move. This was it. I mentioned that there was 3 of us that night. It was at this moment that my other friend, Pat, the one that has stayed silent up to this point, leaned into both of us and said quietly, "This is a Hail Mary, but get ready to run when I say go, alright?" He then picked up one of our sodas and threw it with all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open, and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat screamed, "Run!" and we took off across the parking lot. The van squealed off in the other direction, and we hurried our asses home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up on their plans. Then we found out what actually happened. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out his drink and slipped in a big-ass rock into his cup. Then, he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid had just thrown a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It definitely bought us some time to put some distance between us. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that. I'm still amazed by it. Moral of the story, kids, don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose the fight. When I was a small child, I had a massive Lego collection that I kept primarily at my grandmother's house. When she died, the Legos were moved from her house into my attic. Last year around Halloween, I was searching in the attic for my ID, which I dropped up there, and found my old favorite bin, which was basically the box of Legos I liked the most, and therefore had out the most when I was younger. And some more digging, I found a box I didn't know I still had that had even cooler blocks than my favorite bin. Even though I'm in my late teens, I brought it up to my bedroom and went through it, and picked out some cool pieces I never knew I had. Special ice cream blocks, parts of a giant Lego snake, boat stuff, etc. I started getting a nagging feeling that I was being watched, and looked down the hall into my mother's closet room, which she usually kept closed, to see that the door was open. I started to pack the Legos up because it was getting late and I didn't like the feeling I was getting, and something in my head told me to believe in it. I wasn't sure what it was, but it freaked me out, so I packed the Legos up despite the feeling and went downstairs to leave the house and take my dog on a walk. I kept the uncomfy feeling while on the walk, and something told me that if I went down one exact street I normally wouldn't go down, I would see 3 kids in the younger class who I'm not close to and who wouldn't normally be on that street. So I decided to go down the street anyway, and sure enough, there they were rounding the corner. I get freaked out and go back home and just hide the Legos and try to ignore the nagging feeling of being watched. A few days later, I went with my friend to carve pumpkins in her yard. When I sit down in the grass, I feel something sharp sticking in my leg. I pick it up, and it's a sharpened, partially burned Lego block. My friend's younger brother was the only person who could have possibly owned Legos, but he has special needs and that would be an eating risk. I asked her about it, and she never even has fires in her yard or owns Legos. I remembered this entire ordeal in detail a few days ago when I found the Lego bin stuffed in the back of my closet. When I went to the bathroom and came out after taking a shower, the 3 windows I had open due to the heat wave in my area were all closed, with me, the only person in the house. A constructed Lego minifigure was in a sitting position on my pillow with a skeleton print head. Whenever I think about this presence, something happens. like a noise in the attic, or a door opening by itself, a voice in my head, or a piece of Lego somewhere it shouldn't be. This was on Halloween night. My ex-fiancé Connor and his stepmom claimed that his house was haunted. Once or twice a week when I would come over, they would be burning sage next to the door. I never thought anything of it. Connor and I would be cuddling on the couch, late, between 10 and 12 at night, and we would hear footsteps, but we would always just assume it was his sisters waking up and using the restroom. Also, for context, I'm a practicing Christian ever since I was little. Anyway, it was Halloween, and I decided to do a spirit box session with Connor's high-power microphone. I would record for a couple of minutes, then listen to the recording. I did this for about half an hour, and nothing. I began to taunt whatever was in the house. I was claiming BS, like there was nothing really there. I decided to leave the microphone running for longer than normal, roughly 15 minutes instead of 5. I can't remember what I heard in the playback audio, but it was more than just Connor and my voices. I rewound it again to see if we could decipher what these apparent voices were saying. I remember something that felt like a rush of cold ice wind coming over me, and I couldn't talk. My left arm clenched up, as it does when I'm extremely cold. I tried to explain what was going on, but I couldn't get the words off my tongue. Connor thought I was messing with him and told me to stop acting and relax. He tried to force my arm to unclench, but I was able to fight his strength. This never happened before. I started to panic, and the rest of my body curled into a tensed fetal position. He tried to get me to uncurl, but it still didn't work. I couldn't mutter anything except for Hosanna. This phrase, Hosanna, was the only word I could speak for a solid 5 minutes whilst this was happening. I was honestly scared of what was happening. What scared me was that I couldn't understand what was going on. I kept saying Hosanna, quietly, but getting louder the more I said it. I was still scared witless, mind you. Connor kept asking me what it meant, and I couldn't even bring my tongue to say what it meant, until the room became warm again. I was finally able to untense my muscles and sit up, and he asked me again what Hosanna meant. In Hebrew, it means God save us, God help us, God deliver us. I was so scared that I went home and slept with my room light on for the rest of the night. I spoke with him about the incident the following morning, and he told me that he warned me not to mess with the spirits in the house. He did no such thing, ever. Hell, he gave me a microphone so I could do EVP sessions on Halloween. This is a warning. Please, please never taunt spirits. It doesn't matter if you think they're friendly or not. They will mess you up. I can't exactly tell when it first started, because my place has been haunted for as long as I can remember, but a few months ago, I started getting some really strange dreams. I'd wake up in my room in total darkness and feel the worst unexplained fear, feeling like something's right there watching me. Then I'd wake up and realize it was just a dream and my room isn't as dark as I thought it was. Then it got worse. From once every few months, it went to once or twice a month, and every time the dream advanced. First, I'd turn on my floor lamp, and when I did, I woke up. Then the floor lamp stopped working in the dream, so I'd use my phone light, then that stopped working as well. So I'd have to either turn on the switch on the wall, or get out of the room to be able to wake myself up. These experiences got worse since Halloween, and I started to get other types of activity as well. On Halloween night, I was alone at home with my friend, and the light was on in the kitchen. We heard the light switch turning off, so we thought thieves got in and got really scared and called a friend. When he got here, we realized everything was fine, just the light switch was off. Since then, I got more activity. Switches turning off when I'm at home alone. Open doors shutting in the middle of the night. A damn candle was lit on fire out of nowhere one night, and the dreams got worse and worse. So I started keeping track of the time, and noticed it's always between 4:50 and 5 a.m. Only once it was 5:50 a.m., but I was sleeping in a different room. The dreams got worse and worse since last month. They are now followed by sleep paralysis and seeing dark shadows when I wake up. Last night I had insomnia, so I couldn't sleep until 4 a.m. when I took a melatonin pill just because I didn't want 4:30 a.m. to catch me awake. As I was falling asleep, I had my eyes just a little bit open, enough to see my room, and I see a human-looking like shadow coming out of the wall next to my bed and crossing my room. When it got out of my view, I jumped and turned on the floor light, but nothing was there. I had the feeling I was watched, and also the unexplained fear. It was 4:10 a.m. Today, my mother was in the kitchen with her friends, and a glass exploded out of nowhere. She is extremely skeptic about this stuff, but I told her everything, and she wants to call a priest. Turns out, she's been woken at 5 a.m. every night too. Update. I want to start by saying that I think it finally left. It's been days since the last strange event. I talked to a lot of people about it that had similar experiences, and they said it might have been some sort of portal that opens periodically, considering I get entities like this one every few years. After my last update, I tried to be more firm, telling it out loud every night before going to bed, to not wake me up anymore, because I can't rest and I'll be grumpy the next morning. To my surprise, I had a few quiet nights, but I started hearing strange noises, and I couldn't tell where they were coming from. So, to explain, my extendable sofa is in the middle of the room. Exactly where it ends is the wall where I saw it, and after that, there's another half of the room with a bookcase drawer and basic stuff. Nothing electrical, and nothing that could cause those noises. The noises sounded like clicks or cracks, similar to the sound the TV makes shortly after shutting it off. I turned the light on multiple times to figure out the source, but every time the noises stopped. After that one night, I was laying on the edge of my sofa, with my shoulder supported by the wall, exactly on the spot where I saw the shadow. All of a sudden, something stabbed me in the shoulder, like 2 fingers coming out of the wall, pushing my skin. That really worried me, and I avoided that wall ever since. So, as I said, it didn't wake me up anymore after I asked it not to. But one night, my friend stayed over. I wake up in the middle of the night. Guess what time? 'Cause I hear her humming in her sleep. I shake her, and when she wakes up, she says, "Weren't you in the balcony a moment ago?" She then tells me about the strange dream she had. She was in my room and she was really scared for no reason. Then she thought she woke up. It was really dark and she saw me, or a person, in the balcony staring at her. Then I woke her up for real. She's convinced it was clothes, but I had no clothes hanging up that night. After this evening, the entity went quiet, and it has been like that ever since, almost a week now. I hope it's gone for good. My mum said she saw a demon on Halloween. As a backstory, she has this friend who likes to communicate with spirits. Lately, my mum's been making excuses to keep her away, because she thinks this friend attracts bad things by doing what she does. Onto Halloween Day, a couple of people were at my mum's house, a woman and her son, and they were sitting in the kitchen. You know how it's said demonic entities smell like sulfur? When the woman walked in, she kept saying that there was a gas leak in the house that smelled really bad. Nobody else smelled anything. At some point during the visit, the woman and son started arguing with each other. All of a sudden, my mum heard a shrieking sound. When she glanced up, she saw a 4-foot-tall demonic creature standing between the woman and son. It was very wrinkly, bristly hair, huge nose, reddish yellow eyes. She gasped, so the woman and son stopped arguing to see what was wrong. But my mum didn't tell them that she saw something. My mum no longer saw the demon, but within 30 seconds of seeing it, the woman felt really ill and had to throw up. She started turning purple and said it felt like she was choking. They eventually went home, and my mum called the woman to tell her what she saw and heard. Well, the woman said she heard the shriek too, but assumed it was coming from outside somewhere. My aunt is into crystals and all that stuff, so she was invited over to cleanse the house that same night. When my aunt was walking around, she stopped and said it was ice cold. She just so happened to be standing where the demon creature was seen earlier. Then, the cold moved behind my mum, like it went to hide, so my aunt did her thing and sent the demon out. Today, she's going to come over to smudge the house. Now, I'm searching online for similar descriptions of the creature. My aunt referred to it as a demon, so I just called it that in my retelling for lack of a better word, and because it didn't sound like it was a human spirit. I found one tidbit online about the wrinkly skin, that they don't do a good job of trying to look human, so the skin ends up looking like that. What she saw was ashy grey colour with deep wrinkles. My mum definitely doesn't want anything to do with it. She was thinking that it was attached to the woman, but she also suspects it might have been in the house because of the friend that I mentioned at the start. Hopefully it's gone, especially when I go there to visit. She's also had various paranormal experiences having to do with ghosts, etc. throughout her life. But what she saw on Halloween was a first. I'm telling this story because for 5 years, I've been thinking about something that has happened to me and don't know what to think. First, I have to mention that I'm someone who has always been popular. I've never tried to be, and I hate attention. I battle depression, and a big reason is because I don't think highly of myself, and I'm definitely nothing special. The fact that others do, and me not understanding why, just really upsets me. People say, there's something special about you. I seem to have an energy that people gravitate to. I mention this because it has relevance. It was 5 years ago, around Halloween. I went through a stint where I was intrigued by demonology. I never had intent to practice it or anything, but just wanted to learn more about it. I had a story idea for a novel that was based on the main character worshipping a demon. So I read a ton of material on Ars Goetia and Solomon's demons. As a side note, it's actually very interesting if you look at it from a fictional point of view. I do believe in demons and the supernatural, and I found myself spiraling down this dark road. I don't know how to explain the feelings I started to have. I felt as if I opened a realm for entities to approach me. I felt a darkness all around me at all times. I felt a very strong presence around me that was certainly dark, but not necessarily threatening. Nevertheless, it was really frightening. Yes, this could have just been my imagination, but what happened next makes me believe otherwise. I went out with a group of friends in Columbus, Ohio, and had some drinks. It was Halloween weekend. The 31st was the following night, and a good portion of people were in costume. We left the bar. I was tipsy, but not wasted by any means. My friends grabbed some food from a street cart, but I wasn't hungry. For some reason, I felt myself pulled to the alleyway, and I walked out of sight from where my friends were. There was this group of 6 to 7 people, dressed all in black and in what seemed like spandex material, or even possibly body paint. I could really only see their faces. The majority of them were Caucasian women in their 40s or 50s, but there were also 2 men standing further behind them. The women approached me quickly, like unrealistically quickly. They were completely circled around me. They started rubbing my body all over and repeating, "He's perfect." I was completely frozen and couldn't move or speak. I didn't say a word and didn't move. I didn't know why. Maybe I was just speechless. It seemed like I started to float and was out of my body. I remember looking down and seeing the top of my head. I wasn't exactly scared, more so alarmed and confused, too much in a trance to be scared. Right about at that point, my friend's friend grabbed me by the shirt and jerks me out of the circle. I snap out of the daze or trance and look back and just see them all staring at me, saying nothing as I walk away. I barely knew the guy that grabbed me, but he said he realized I wasn't with them and felt I was in trouble. We went home and I was completely beside myself. I have only told a few people this story, and usually I'm not believed. Who were those people? Why was I perfect? And what did they want? Were they drawn to me because I had demonic energy from the research I was doing? Could they sense that? And was that why I was perfect? Or was it just a swinger club looking for a member? Was I perfect for being kidnapped? Did they want to sell my organs on the black market? Was I perfect for some sort of sacrifice? Or did they just need a third baseman for their co-ed softball team? I don't know, but it has always been a mystery to me. Anyway, the next night, I went to bed and woke up in the middle of the night. I heard this very faint chanting coming from my closet. I was freaking out. I opened my closet and my iPad, which I hadn't used for weeks, was playing music through the headphones, and the song was Demons by A$AP Rocky, a song I have never even heard and didn't realize I had ever downloaded. At this point, I concluded it was time to end my research of the Ars Goetia, turned on Bob Ross, and tried to fill my thoughts with happy little trees and went back to sleep. Recently, I've had other paranormal-esque events happen to me, and they have been occurring more frequently, and this story has been on my mind constantly. I had to get this out to the world to see if anyone has experienced anything like this. This is a short but chilling experience that happened to me when I was younger. For a bit of background, I grew up in a very haunted house with lots of activity, so I was generally used to things like this happening, but it was still unexpected. I had to be about 8 or so. Me and my family had just got home from trick-or-treating at around 8 or 10 p.m. for a break. I went into my room to get something and turned the light on. For reference, I had a shoestring tied to the little cable for my light because I was too short to reach. I remember right after turning the light on that I had a sudden urge to look up. I stared up in shock at my mangled ceiling fan. It was perfectly bent or warped. There was no way to even do that, even if anyone wanted to, considering the metal it was made from would have snapped if they tried to, and no one was even home to do it. I recently asked my mum about it because I wasn't sure if my mind had made it up or anything, considering it's a bit of a blurry memory, and she said it did in fact happen, and that we have a picture somewhere as proof. It remains unexplained, and just funny that it happened on Halloween. When I was 6, I got appendicitis. I had this for a while, but each time my mother took me to the doctor, he just said it was a really bad stomachache. He told my mother that I wouldn't be able to do the things I was doing if I had appendicitis. I was playing with toys and whatnot. Turns out, I did have appendicitis. However, my appendix was not in the correct place, which is why it hadn't been diagnosed earlier. On a fine Tuesday afternoon, I was at my babysitter's house while my parents were at work. My appendix burst, and I can remember screaming from the pain, throwing up over the side of the couch, and fainting into a pool of vomit. I'm told that an ambulance was called, and I was rushed to the hospital. I remember bits and pieces here and there, and every time I came to, I would see an older guy I'd never seen before, and I seemed to be the only one seeing him. I can remember vividly what he looked like. He had a big, unruly beard that was very salt and pepper, slick back dark hair, and dark eyes. He wore a blank black Henley t-shirt with a faded leather jacket, tight jeans, and beat-up Converse high tops. I remember that the look in his eyes was one of melancholy and understanding, but at the time, I could only call it sad, the way adults are when kids are hurt or upset. I only ever saw him a few times. I saw him in the ambulance. I saw him in the hospital in what I can only assume was when I was in the ICU, and I saw him a few times in my room when I came out of surgery. He didn't say anything most times I saw him, and I thoroughly remember him shaking his head a few times, chuckling to himself. The last time I saw him, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw that he was by my bed, staring at my mum, who was asleep in the chair by my bed. As I looked at him, he turned and said the only thing he ever said to me, "This sucks, I know. Sorry, kid." Shortly after that, I discovered the movie and book, The Outsiders, and I became obsessed with the greasers. The guy I saw resembled this style, I think rather obviously. I wrote short stories, essays and so on about the era. As I grew older, I began to lose interest, but I never forgot the guy. One Halloween a couple of years ago, I decided to dress up in random things I had that could be a greaser. This would have been 20 plus years later. I had a bet going on growing out my beard, so I didn't shave either. So I did my best to create the look of a greaser, and asked my wife, we were dating then, if I looked like one. She told me I looked like a combination of a biker and greaser because of the beard, but the leather jacket and greased back hair was perfect. I went to the full-length mirror in my father-in-law's bedroom to check everything out, and there I was, a slightly younger version of the man I saw when I was 6. The biggest difference, my beard wasn't salt and pepper. I was in complete shock. My wife came over and asked me what was wrong. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Go figure. As the years have passed since that Halloween, I've gotten rid of my leather jacket and I don't wear Converse all that often. I pluck the white hairs out of my beard because if I don't, I look more and more like that man. I have no idea what the hell that was, or why this has been happening. My wife tells me not to worry. She says everyone greys. I haven't told her about the man because it sounds nuts. Update. I told my wife. She was confused at first, asking me questions along the lines of, "Are you sure no one else saw this guy?" And could it have been some random bystander that happened to you? Were you in pain, etc.? I explained as best I could what it felt like and so on. Took about 4 hours to get to the end. Now, she's insanely curious about who it could have been. If the person was real but being ignored, or if not a spirit protector, then who was it? Could it have been someone from an alternate universe? Could it have been an alien or higher plane being that had seen the future and knew what I would look like so as to use this look to bring a calming effect? All kinds of stuff. She is way more interested than freaked out. 100% wants answers, and has been reading random books to catch some insight into what it could have been. Not sure what I was scared of in telling her my story, but now she wants to talk about it all the time. It's her newest hobby. There's only one person in my family that looks like me, and that would be my great-grandfather. He was in World War I, and probably the only relative I look like. My other family members are smaller than I am, not nearly as broad. Also, he and I seem to be the only ones that could grow a full beard. You know when someone discusses a loved one's passing, they talk about the signs, the premonitions, the presence. I lost my dad just a couple of weeks ago, and I had all of these. Just 2 weeks before his passing, I visited him and we had a big family get-together with dinner. My dad and I had a difficult relationship in some ways, because he liked to keep pretty isolated, or maybe I didn't visit enough. I'm not sure which now. Anyway, at this visit, he had gotten a haircut and shave, and he looked healthier and more presentable than he had in the last 2 years. I brought a dish I was sure he'd have nothing to do with, and he ate with me and said how delicious it was. I put on the Eagles and we sang Take It Easy. At the end of the night, he let me hug and kiss him goodbye, which he has never done in his life. I told my dad I was moving to the coast to be near the ocean. He asked if he could come see me when I got there, as he'd never been near the ocean. I promised he could, despite my shock at the idea he would even come, and we spent time dreaming of how wonderful it was going to be when he came. Afterward, my husband said it was the best visit we ever had with Dad. It was. I was really looking forward to seeing him on his birthday, November 2nd, not knowing I would not get a chance to ever see him again, losing him 2 days beforehand. Later in the week, my husband and I went for a walk, and he asked why I cared so much to research my family tree. I told him how a couple of years back I had finally done my dad's tree, and all the things I learned, including the very interesting story I shared with my husband about how my simple father was actually a talented musician, and I literally sang the only song I ever remember him writing as we walked. It was about one of the last prisoners executed at the Don jail, who I'm pretty sure Dad named me after. It's a sad song about the father of the prisoner attending and mourning his son's hanging. My husband got very quiet and noted how unusually deep and somber the conversation had turned. I agreed, but it felt right to talk about at the time. A week later, my daughter said that my dad had tried to call her, but she was unavailable. I don't think he's ever tried to call her before, so I tried to call him back, but his number came up out of service. I have no explanation for how this occurred within 30 minutes of him calling my daughter. I'd had a bad feeling, so I tried to call my mum, who is his ex-wife, but he was still good friends with and lived close by, No answer. I told myself to let it go and stop worrying. Early Halloween morning. My husband was up late as usual, working on some papers at a local cafe. I woke up at 12:24 a.m. and called him, anxious and asking where he was and when he'd be back. He accused me of behaving strangely and said he was where he always was and would come back soon. I woke again at 1:50 a.m. after what could be described as a panic, and called him again to discover he was downstairs in our house. I was disoriented, and he accused me again of acting very weird. I wrote it off and went to sleep, barely remembering anything of it by morning. This has never happened. The following day I had scheduled off work for an appointment, which turned out to be very lucky, because I was still in my bed instead of being at my desk 90 minutes away where I normally would have been when my brother called and told me Dad died the night before. I left quickly with my husband to go where Dad and my family live. In the car, I started crying. My husband gently asked what I was thinking about. I said, "When I woke up and I called you last night, I can already tell you that's when he went." I was right. When we got there, we learned that Dad died at 12:25 a.m. Halloween morning. My mum divorced my dad over 30 years ago. He never did divorce her and never loved another. He should have died in his apartment floor alone, but she came to visit him that afternoon and insisted on bringing him to the hospital after seeing he was unwell. He was admitted and stabilized after arrhythmia. She told him she loved him and she would let us know he was in the hospital and that she would visit in the morning. That wily old bird passed away just a couple of minutes after the love of his life left his bedside, and I'm certain that was deliberate. For the next several days, Take It Easy played on continuous loop in my head. I thought I was going insane and I couldn't make it stop. After the funeral, after my eulogy at the end of which I played Take It Easy, it finally did. I had spent the days asking for a sign from Dad that he was okay. I now believe this endless, repetitive music in my head was his goodbye to me. I'm still going to move next to the ocean, Dad, and when I do, I promise I'll take you with me. One last thing. I found an envelope of cash in Dad's apartment when I went to empty it with my sister. Not much money, but obviously took a long time for him to save, as $4,500 is a lot for a man as poor as him. I split it with my 2 siblings, and I immediately took some of my share to get a tattoo. Of course, it is to remember my father, and it is at my right shoulder, where he always was in life, and most certainly is now. It was like he put it there for us to find. It was under a pile of laundry on his bed, of all strange places, in an envelope, wrapped in a bag. It was this past Halloween when I went to this mall with some friends after school. We were a group of 8 senior guys, but we decided to do some trick-or-treating for the last time before it became questionable. Hell, it's even more questionable now seeing 6-foot guys walking around in pirate costumes. But hey, we might as well have some fun, right? We went into the mall to find it empty for a bit, but soon, the mall got more and more full with mums and their kids, trick-or-treating the different stores. Before we left, we all got a quick bite to eat from the food court before we went trick-or-treating. Our plan of going about Halloween was not traditional though. In a nutshell, we would be in my friend's car, and we would be driving up and down the neighborhoods with take-one bowls and dumping them in our pillowcases or trash bags. Before we left, we were on our way to the exit when I had a massive urge to go to the toilet. After all, I ate some tacos from Taco Bell, and I don't know how I didn't expect this coming. I tell them to go ahead, and that I would catch up to them. I was starting to sweat from the urge to go, and I went pretty deep into the mall to find a restroom, finding the sign saying restrooms in a long white hallway. Now, without thinking, I ran into the first restroom I saw and went straight to the stalls. I can remember feeling relief as I went in and sat down ready to do my business. Right before I was about to, however, I heard this old raspy voice. "Son, I think you're in the wrong restroom." I froze, and I let out a somewhat choked, "What?" The old and raspy voice showed who he was, and he bent down to tell me, "You're in the girls' restroom." He let out some sort of twisted giggle or cackle. I can remember his face clearly, old and wrinkled, white tannish skin, white hair, with round framed glasses that made his psychotic eyes huge. I was frozen. No, in complete shock and horror, as I sat there looking at this man who was in the girls' restroom for God knows why. We both stared at each other for God knows how long. The old man broke the awkward silence by saying, "You know what? I'm gonna pay you a visit." He had this long ear-to-ear grin with only his lips and was beginning to cackle more, showing his brown and rotten teeth. At that moment, I knew it was time to get the hell out of there. All I can remember before I took off was seeing him starting to crawl under the stall to me. I sat up, not even zipping up my pants or putting on my belt, just pulling them up and ran. I dashed out of there as fast as I could, looking like I'd just crapped my pants. As I was running out of the hallway, I looked back and saw the old man sprint walking out. He was about 6'3" and was wearing an olive khaki jacket with black stained pants and construction boots. I kept booking it all the way until I was out of the mall. I see my friends in their cars waiting for me. I ran up to my friend Fox's car, and I was shaking as I was putting my seatbelt on. He asked me what was wrong. I told him in a stern voice to start the car. My friend Skylar was next to me, asking me why I cut him off, and raising my voice higher, "Fox, we gotta go now." Fox started the car and signaled the rest of our friend group to follow us. We drove out of there. I didn't bother looking back. I've had some strange encounters with some people, some weirder than others, but I never thought that one of these days I would find myself in that position of being face to face with a deranged person in a restroom. I haven't seen him since, not that I would want to. I just pray that he left the mall as soon as I did. What still keeps me up at night, however, is why. Why was he in the girls' restroom in the first place? Okay, so I can't give an explanation to this experience, but I can tell you it was one of the most frightening moments of my life. My best friend at the time, my brother, his friends, and my friend's boyfriend all went out to our local abandoned house, which we call it Witch's Circle, to go ghost hunting. Now, this little abandoned house is actually a national park called Little Basin Creek Reservoir. But there's actually a story behind this house, which I don't know how much of it I believe, but it's said that on Halloween night in the 50s sometime, two guys brought their girlfriends out for a sacrifice. I've gone to the archives, done tons of research on this, and can't find anything to verify this information. This Halloween when we went out there, we were the only cars out there. You have to drive past town a little ways and head out a dirt road to get there. And there's only one spot for parking, so we would be able to see if others were there. As we start making our walk down the trail to the house, I'm holding my best friend's hand. We walked under a tree, while the entire time I'm staring at the house and not paying attention to my surroundings like I should be in a dark wooded area. A small branch from the tree that we're all walking under at the time falls and lands horizontally at my feet. I didn't see this happen, but my friend and my brother did. They stopped me to look, before stepping over the severed branch. I should have taken its warning and not kept going, but I did. As we got further to the house, now it's not a super long walk to the house, maybe 120 feet from the entrance. We all stood talking quietly amongst ourselves, and then we all heard a very high-pitched scream come from the backyard of the house. We stopped in our tracks, and I ran back towards the cars. I've never been more terrified in my life. It's a sound that I will never be able to erase from my memory. That high-pitched death scream. There's no way I can debunk this, as we were the only ones out there, and it definitely wasn't the sound of an animal, especially because it sounded like a human woman. I haven't been back there since. I was 14 at the time, now 16, and was, and still am, awkward. I like to avoid confrontation, so I say as little as possible to offend someone or make them upset with me. At the time, I was at a stupid Halloween party that was basically for adults and young 6 to 10-year-old kids, so I was extremely bored, and my mum said I was too old to trick or treat, so I just walked along with a group of adults and young kids in my costume. At one point, this 16-year-old guy was introduced to me as being the oldest children of one of the mums in the group. You could tell by the way he talked and acted that there was something off with him, but I thought it was great that there was someone closer to my age, so I ignored it. My mum suggested we split off from the group to hang out. She's a very lenient person, and I had a phone, so I agreed. He and I were walking around the neighborhood as he went door to door, awkwardly asking for candy, as I stood back on the sidewalk as I couldn't ask for candy. At one point during the night, I noticed something with him was really off. He started asking me if I believed in vampires. I said yes because I was worried what his reaction would be if I'd said no. His eyes lit up, and he started talking about him being a vampire and asking if I wanted to come back to his house so he could bite and suck on my neck. I nervously laughed and said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, I have a boyfriend and he wouldn't be comfortable with that." He replied with, "I have a girlfriend, but she wouldn't mind. It's just sucking on your neck because my fangs get sore when I don't. Just come over." I knew he lived in the neighborhood because everyone in the group did, other than my family, luckily, so I didn't know how to say no. I kept politely declining, and the sun was almost completely down, so it was getting dark. I was getting scared from his persistence and being alone with him, so I started blowing up my mum's phone with calls and trying not to cry. She wasn't answering, so we wandered along the huge neighborhood, and by the grace of God, ran into the original group. I ran to my mum and hugged her while crying and being mad at her for not answering, because she left her phone at the house. It may not sound that creepy, but this guy was so persistent and basically begging me to let him suck my neck when I was alone with him. This happened when I was either 10 or 11. It was Halloween night, and to make things even better, this year it fell on a Friday. I was trick-or-treating with a friend of mine, who I'll just call Jane, and both her and her mum, and my mum. Jane was dressed as a birthday present, and I was Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. It was around 9 PM, and Jane and I had collected a mountain of candy, to the point where our arms were beginning to hurt from carrying the bags. During our trek, we came to a hill in our neighborhood where there aren't any houses until you get to the top. I was determined to increase my candy intake as fast as possible, so I sprinted to the top of the hill, leaving Jane and our parents behind. When I got to the top, I heard my mum yell for me to wait for them. I was impatient, but I did as I was told. At that time, a black car pulled up next to me. I can't remember what type of car it was, but I think it was either a Volvo or Honda Civic. A guy who looked like he was in his late 20s to early 30s rolled down the window and said hello to me. He looked like the friendly type, so I happily said hello back. He asked me, "Have you gotten a lot of candy tonight?" I responded, "Yep," and happily showed off my nearly overflowing bag. He smiled. "That's awesome. Can you come here and give me some candy?" That's when I froze. My parents were the kind of people who drilled stranger danger warnings into your head, and this guy may not have looked like a creeper, but all the signs seemed to be there. Even my 10 or 11-year-old self could see that. At that point, I really had no idea what to do. I guess the guy saw my face because he motioned for me to come. "I just want a little candy. You don't have to give me your whole bag," he said. I noticed someone in the passenger side of the car lean forward and look at me too, and both had creepy smiles on their faces. I contemplated whether or not I should run. Luckily, about that time, my mother came running up the hill, having seen what was going on. The guy saw her too, and his face turned white. "I've got to go," he said, staring at my mum the whole time, and floored the car down the road. My mum ran to me and I threw my arms around her, starting to cry. When Jane and her mum finally caught up, we all walked back to my house. I was clinging to my mum's arm the whole time. The bag of candy was eventually able to take my mind off the situation, but I occasionally look back on this nowadays and can't help but wonder what could have happened to me if I'd have gone up to that guy's car. I thank God that I was smart enough not to. So, creepy Halloween guy, let's not meet again. For the past 16 years, I've lived in a very standard house, on a very average street, in a big boring neighborhood. In the daytime, it's quiet. There aren't very many kids anymore, just empty nesters or the elderly. However, not very many kids means that there are still some, and so when Halloween comes around, I still go all out. The pumpkins, the fake spider webs, the blinding strobe lights, all of it. Then I sit on the porch, dressed as a spooky witch, and wait. Now, every single year, mostly back in my trick-or-treating days, I can recall a certain strangeness. There is, without fail, a man that walks the night silently dressed as none other than Michael Myers. As in the Halloween slasher Michael Myers. Pretty harmless. It is Halloween, and it is scary. He never says a word, just walks silently with a long knife that glints and catches the street lamps. This year, I'm sitting in the dark on my porch. It's 2 hours in. I've had a staggering total of 5 kids come through, and was about to give up. Behold, Michael Myers makes his appearance. Quietly, he's walking past my house. I'm thinking, dang, my porch light is off. He won't see me. But in the moment, he stops mid-stride and turns towards me and freezes. For what felt like ages, he stared at me in the dark, totally alone. Then he twitches his head and resumes his walk. The worst part is, no one else seems to have ever noticed this guy. Neither of my 2 brothers, not my best friend, no one. For 16 years, I have been the only one to have seen him. He's good. This happened back when I was in high school. At the time, I worked part-time at a grocery store, and it had become a tradition for a bunch of us to all go to some sort of haunt for Halloween. The first year we went to a haunted forest, and then haunted corn maze, that began with me falling face first into a mud puddle. Seriously, this was the very beginning. and then including things like getting stuck in a shed-type building with a slew of Jason Voorhees characters, being chased by Leatherface, and other such funny things. It was fun. Anyway, I want to say this was our 3rd year doing this. We were all headed to a haunted factory in a nearby city, and as this was before the advent of smartphones, we relied on printed directions. Because of the size of our group, we had to travel in 3 cars, and I was in the last car of the caravan with my co-workers Noel and Janie. Alas, we got lost because the people at the head of the group were terrible at navigation, and we ended up in a rough part of the city. At one point, we drove by a parking garage, and I heard someone scream. Eventually, our car got separated from the rest of the group at a stoplight, and by the time it turned green again, we lost everyone else. We drove around for a while, talking to each other on the phone and trying to find each other. I was in the back seat, talking to someone in the first car, Laura, and trying to direct my driver, Noel, while Laura tried to do the same with her husband, who was driving their car. It was not going well. Eventually I was like, Noel, pull over somewhere and let them come and find us. Now, there were a lot of parking places Noel could have pulled over, like a Burger King or an office building parking lot. But he chose the parking lot of a shady bar. Why? I have no idea. Perhaps it was because there was a large key bank sign nearby that served as a good landmark for the others to find us. So we were waiting in this parking lot for the others, when a line of about 7 cars pulled into the bar. This wasn't too surprising because it was a Friday night, but they didn't park normally. No, they surrounded us. The front end of the cars pointing towards us, and because of their closeness, there was no space for us to drive out of there. We were trapped. For a few minutes, they just stared at us from their cars, and then they all started to get out and walk towards us en masse. There were at least 10 rough-looking guys, and by this point, I was convinced we were about to be robbed. Get your wallet out, I told Noel and Janie, as I did the same. I didn't have much money anyway, to be honest, which worried me because I wondered what they would do if it wasn't enough. I was terrified, but was trying to keep calm, and Noel seemed genuinely not worried, but I can't believe he wasn't at least somewhat concerned, especially given his car contained both a teenager, me, and his girlfriend, Janie. As for Janie, she was so scared that she was crying. The guy I presumed to be the leader reached the door first, approaching the passenger side where Janie and I were. He looked inside the car at us for a moment, and then he and his group all went back to their cars and parked normally. Well, I wasn't taking any chances and ordered very sternly, "Noel, go to the Burger King for God's sake." We eventually grouped up with everyone else and made it to the factory, which was far less scarier than what we had endured. It maybe doesn't sound scary, but it really was. I have a few theories. One of the guys got to the car and saw that we probably didn't have much to offer them and changed their minds about mugging us. However, this seems unlikely. 2, they thought we were someone else until they reached the car and looked inside. Definitely possible. And 3, they were just messing with us. Whatever the reason, I was truly scared, and to this day, 13 years later, I regard the city with caution. This happened on Halloween night in 2010, I think. My dad is a huge Halloween freak. Every year we decorate the front porch like mad. Basically, it looked like a Halloween store puked in our yard. We had people hide in the bushes and ambush kids, that kind of thing. After the night was done, my dad and I would unplug everything and take things that could get stolen inside. We had this one Halloween prop that sat on a table on the front porch next to our laughing skull. It was a pretty decent sized seance ball with an old hag head in it. It was motion activated. No big deal, right? So, of course it starts making the creepy noise, and the old hag starts talking when we walk by to unplug it. We unplug it. It abruptly shuts up and we take it inside. We take down more stuff, but I was right behind my dad as he walked by the seance head, and like magic, it starts the creepy noise and talking. Now, this thing's unplugged. The plug is off to the side of the ball, with no outlet around. So no, it was not powered, and it was not battery operated. I seriously thought my dad was messing with me, but he looked just as confused as me. When he bent down to check it, it once again abruptly stopped. He picked it up just to see if the off switch was set, and it was. Is it possible for leftover power to turn things back on, even if it has been unplugged for a while? I know that batteries can cause that, but this was electricity powered by a plug. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for that ball to talk again. This encounter took place on Halloween 2010. I was a sophomore in high school, not really at the age to full out party, for me anyway, and not really at the age where I wanted to sit at home with my parents all night, handing out candy because I was too old to trick or treat. That day at school, a group of 5 to 6 friends and I decided to make plans to roam around the city, wreaking havoc, doing typical 16-year-old Halloween stuff. It started out pretty chill. We all got ready and dressed up in our costumes, etc. I didn't have one planned out, but I was a bit eccentric at the time, so I winged it. I wore some purple plants, a rainbow bandana, hippie style, and every other colourful accessory you can imagine, until ultimately I was a rainbow. During our first adventure, we went to Target to walk around and show off all our costumes. I remember distinctly this lady walked up to us who didn't give me any bad vibes and told us all this crazy stuff. We talked to her about how we were going to play with my Ouija board, tarot cards, pendulums, and all that stuff. I used to be super into the paranormal. Her mood instantly changed from friendly to taken aback, almost like she wanted to run away. She told us she had a twin sister and felt very strange. She told us not to mess with the unknown because her sister was psychic and she knew things. Didn't think much of the encounter with a random stranger on Halloween at Target. We did play with Ouija board, but no, we neither got possessed, nor had a creepy encounter with a demon. This is where the encounter comes into play. It was dark, we were bored. 5 of us were in my small room when my parents were home. We had more of a chance getting some excitement by walking around the neighborhood on Halloween than sitting in my room playing board games. So we walked around and even trick-or-treated a little bit. It was a lot of fun until we passed a large, dimly lit, vacant parking lot. It was vacant, all but one van that was situated facing towards the street. This time, I got bad vibes as we walked by. Just as we were passing, a window rolled down. Some of us looked back and some of us kept walking. I stopped and looked back, but it was so dark that all I could see was a faint glow of a cigarette. For some reason, what she said will stick with me forever. She said in a deep, raspy voice, I say she with a grain of salt, I think it was a she. Hey kids, wanna come here and get some candy? I don't get a lot of kids where I'm from. Luckily, I was close enough to home at this point, where I could have gotten there quick if I needed to. And that's exactly what all of us did. I'm really against judging people, but I also like to look out for myself and my friends. Maybe it was an innocent old lady just wanting to hand out candy, but at that point, I trusted my instincts and booked ours. The whole day and night was just weird and creepy. I'm 38, and this happened more than 20 years ago. Me, my cousin, and 3 friends went to a local cemetery in Grand Prairie, Texas, on Halloween. The way to the cemetery is set up in 2 parts. The old part is kind of fenced off. It has an entry so you can drive through, but there's a fence on either side of the rock road, and you turn into this part from the main road called 3rd Street. You can follow a number of parts of the rock road if I remember right, and one of the paths the rock road takes leads to the new part of the cemetery. We walked past the old part on the main road, and then we walked to the edge of the newer part. Once you come to the next road that runs into 3rd Street, you've hit the end of the cemetery. We turned down that road and stayed on the edge of the cemetery and walked probably 50 to 100 yards and decided to set the board down. We wanted to stay close to the edge, just in case things got crazy. And it did, especially towards the end. We set the board down, and we started getting responses right away. I don't remember any responses in particular, other than one coming up a couple of minutes later. Whatever was there didn't like us, so we moved pretty shortly after we started. It just had a bad vibe, and all of us sensed it. After that, we started walking, staying close to the edge. My cousin walked by a water spigot. He was about 5 feet away, and the thing turned on right as he was walking by. It wasn't a sprinkler system or anything like that at all. It could be on a timer, but who knows. We didn't move that far ahead, skipped over a few graves, and set it down again and started asking questions. This one didn't like us either. We did get a few responses, but the only response I remember was, "I kill you 5. We were like, okay, what the hell? When one of us realized there were 5 of us. Right after that, something started to smell bad. We all walked across the street to the parking lot of a beauty salon and some other kind of business. My cousin was like, screw this, and walked back across the street. He then said something like, damn, the smell is gone. We all walked back over cautiously, but there was no smell at all. Weird. At this point, we realized we were probably dealing with something we shouldn't be messing with, so we decided to leave. Of course, everyone wanted to walk along the rock road of the newer part and through the older part. Not me. I wanted to walk right back up the road, the side of the street, back to 3rd Street. My friends were all like, no, we gotta go show we aren't scared. I was scared. Screw them. But I sure as hell wasn't gonna go by myself, so I went with them. Nothing out of the ordinary at first, but as we were getting close to the entrance, one of my friends yelled, "Oh crap," and we all started running. I think I was the only one that looked back. I can't remember whether I actually saw it or not. I believe I did. It was like I saw it in my head, but not with my eyes. What I believe I saw was big. It was see-through, but it had features. It had these spike things around its arms. I guess the best way to describe it is like a leather spiked necklace, but worn around the top shoulder and went around underneath the armpit. But then, I saw one of the craziest things in my entire life that I know for a fact I saw with my own eyes. We were all running towards the front entrance when we noticed 3 dogs, Dobermans, running around in a small, tight little circle. They were barking rapidly, right in the middle of the entrance. They were chasing each other, and where one's tail would end, the next Doberman's head was inches behind. We ran off to the left-hand side of the entrance and jumped the fence there by the softball fields. I remember cutting my hands on the fence. We all ran home.